The shadows of Drenthul's western cliffs had always been our allies. As a Nightblade, I'd spent years learning to move within them, to become one with the darkness that shrouded our world. But on that day, as I crept through the familiar gloom of my home planet's perpetual twilight, the shadows felt different, threatening, as if they knew something I didn't. I was returning from a routine surveillance operation along our system's outer defense perimeter. Nothing unusual had been detected in weeks, just the standard merchant vessels and the occasional lost tourist who'd strayed too close to our restricted zones. My mission had been simple: plant new monitoring devices, retrieve the old ones, and return to base, standard procedure. The first warning came as I was scaling down the cliffside, my elongated fingers finding purchase in holds worn smooth by generations of Nightblades before me. A vibration. Subtle at first, but growing stronger. Not the usual seismic activity our rocky world was known for. This was different. Rhythmic, artificial. I pressed myself against the cliff face, my dark gray skin blending perfectly with the stone. The vibrations were coming from above, way above. I activated my optical enhancers, the cybernetic implants extending from my temples with a soft whir. The perpetual cloud cover that shrouded our world lay thick as ever, but my enhancers could penetrate it. What I saw made my blood run cold. Ships, hundreds of them, but not the sleek, elegant vessels of the Trade Federation or the crystalline ships of the Andari Alliance. These were different, organic, almost alive. They moved through space like a swarm of Krevdal insects, their hulls pulsing with an iridescent flame-like glow, pulsing with an iridescent warm light. My communicator crackled to life. Nightblade Hassop, report status. I kept my voice low, though the ships were far too high to detect me. Command, this is Hassop. We have unknown contacts, multiple vessels, configuration unlike anything in our database. Numbers? I swallowed hard. At least 300 capital ships visible from my position, more arriving by the minute. I paused, watching as another wave emerged from hyperspace. They're arranging themselves into an attack formation. The silence that followed lasted too long. When command responded, it was a different voice. General Krelthar himself. Nightblade, transmit visual data immediately. I connected my optical feed to the secure channel. The general's sharp intake of breath told me he recognized what we were dealing with, even if I didn't. Return to base immediately, Nightblade. Full stealth protocols. Sir, what are we dealing with? Another pause. They're called the Devourers, and they're not here to negotiate. I began my descent, faster now, but still careful to maintain stealth discipline. The vibrations were stronger, and I could hear something else, a low, hungry sound that seemed to resonate through the very rock, like the growl of some massive predator. Sir, I whispered into my communicator, I thought the Devourers were just stories, something to scare younglings. They're real, Hop. All too real. And if they're here... He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. I reached the base of the cliff just as the first orbital strikes began. Green fire rained from the sky, turning our perpetual twilight into a sickly dawn. The attacks weren't targeting our military installations or population centers. They were hitting our farmlands, our mining operations, our resource centers. They weren't here to conquer us. They weren't here to subjugate us. They were here to devour us. As I sprinted through the shadows toward the nearest command bunker, I thought about all the stories I'd heard about the devourers, about how they stripped planets bare, about how they consumed not just resources but people, about how no one who faced them ever survived to tell about it. The stories, it turned out, weren't stories at all. They were warnings, and we hadn't heeded them. The shadows of Drenthul had always been our allies, but as I watched that sickly green fire rain down from above, I realized that some darknesses couldn't be hidden from. Some enemies couldn't be outmaneuvered or outfought. Not by us, anyway. But there were stories about another species. Stories we told in whispers, about being so terrifying that even our oldest and proudest allies refused to speak of them. Stories about creatures who had mastered the art of warfare to such a degree that the galaxy itself gave them a wide berth. Humans, they were called. But surely things weren't that desperate? Not yet. 3 days. That's how long it took for our orbital defense grid to fall. 3 days of constant bombardment, of watching our proudest achievements crumble under the devourers' relentless assault. We'd thought our planetary shields were impenetrable. We were wrong. Movement ahead, Talon whispered through our tactical link. My second-in-command had the best eyes in the unit, even without enhancers. 200 meters, near the processing plant. I signaled the rest of my Nightblade team to hold position. We were deep in what had been our largest agricultural complex, now a smoking ruin of twisted metal and broken dreams. Command had sent us to gather intelligence on the enemy ground forces. So far, we'd managed to avoid direct contact. That was about to change. Through my enhancers, I could see them clearly for the first time. The devourers moved like predators, their elongated bodies rippling with muscle beneath chitinous armor. They walked upright, but there was nothing civilized about their movement. It was pure animal grace, the kind that spoke of countless generations of evolution as apex predators. Kang? I subvocalized. 12, Talon replied. They're eating something. I adjusted my enhancers, zooming in on the scene. Immediately I wished I hadn't. The devourers were clustered around something. Someone. Their massive jaws working methodically. I recognized the uniformed fragments scattered around them. Planetary Defense Force. Command, I whispered into my comm. Visual confirmation of enemy ground forces. They're consuming our casualties. The response was immediate. Can you get closer? We need better data on their capabilities. I wanted to say no. Every instinct screamed at me to fall back, to find a better position, to do anything but get closer to those things. But we needed the intelligence. Moving up, I replied. A team, maintain distance. I'll proceed alone. I felt, rather than heard, my team's disapproval, but they knew better than to argue. I activated my stealth field, an energy-intensive technology that bent light around my body, and began my approach. The smell hit me first, not the expected stench of death, but something worse, something chemical. Their bodies were processing what they consumed, breaking it down into raw materials. They weren't just eating, they were converting. I was 30 meters away when one of them suddenly stopped eating. It raised its head, showing rows of serrated teeth, still dripping with I forced myself to focus. The creature's nostrils flared. It could smell me. I froze, every muscle in my body tensing. The devourer turned its head slowly, methodically, testing the air. Its eyes, all 6 of them, blinked in different patterns, processing visual information across multiple spectrums. For a moment, I thought my stealth field would hold. Then it roared. The sound was like nothing I'd ever heard. Not angry, not threatening, but hungry, desperately, eternally hungry. And suddenly, all 12 of them were alert, heads swiveling, nostrils flaring. "Huss up, get out of there," Taran's voice cracked with urgency. I didn't need to be told twice. I broke into a run, just as the first devourer pounced. Its claws passed through the space where I'd been standing, close enough that I felt the air displacement. The others joined the hunt, spreading out with terrible coordination. Oh God, I wrote out the Italian part, which, just for you real tea guys, I didn't see me, but they couldn't see me, but they could smell me. And they were fast, so fast. I sprinted through the ruins, my stealth field flickering as I pushed it beyond its designed limits. Behind me, the devourers moved with that terrible, predatory grace, leaping from structure to structure, their claws finding purchase on surfaces too smooth for any natural creature. "Taking fire!" Taran's voice cracked through my comm. My team had opened up with their pulse rifles, trying to draw the devourers away from me. I heard the distinctive whine of energy weapons, then screaming. "Fall back," I ordered. "Full retreat, now!" I emerged from the ruins at full sprint, my stealth field finally failing. Ahead, I could see my team falling back in good order, laying down covering fire. The devourers pursuing me barely seemed to notice the energy bolts striking their armor. We ran until our lungs burned and our muscles screamed through the shadowed valleys and across the rocky plains. We ran until we reached the safety of our lines, where heavy weapons finally forced our pursuers to break off. 6 of us had gone out, 4 came back. In the debriefing room, I delivered my report in a voice that didn't shake. I detailed everything: their speed, their strength, their hunting patterns, the way they processed what they consumed, the terrible efficiency of their movements. "Assessment?" General Krelthar asked when I finished. I met his eyes. "Sir, they're not invaders. They're not conquerors. They're a force of nature. A hunger given form." I paused. "We can't stop them. Not with what we have." The general nodded slowly. "Similar reports are coming in from all sectors. Our heaviest weapons barely slow them down. Our stealth technology only delays them." He looked down at his terminal, where reports of defeats and retreats scrolled endlessly. "The Defense Council meets tomorrow. We'll need to consider options." I knew what he meant. The whispered stories, the last resort, the humans. But after what I'd seen today, I was starting to think that even they might not be enough. "Contact left!" Taran's warning came just as the wall beside us exploded inward. I tackled the nearest soldier, pushing her out of the way as devourer claws raked through the space where she'd been standing. Our pulse rifles whined in the confined space, the energy bolts illuminating the corridor in strobing blue light. It had been 2 weeks since my first encounter with the devourers, 2 weeks of constant retreat, of watching our world being eaten alive piece by piece. We'd lost the outer territories almost immediately. Now we were fighting for the inner cities, for our most sacred places, for the very heart of our civilization. The devourer lunged through the breach, its massive frame filling the corridor. Energy bolts struck its chitinous armor, leaving scorch marks but little else. Behind me, I heard the distinctive whine of a plasma cutter powering up. "Down!" I ordered, and my team dropped flat as superheated plasma burst over our heads. The devourers screamed, not in pain, but in fury as the plasma ate through its armor. It took 3 sustained bursts before it finally fell. "Seal that breach," I ordered, already knowing it was temporary at best. "Command, this is Nightblade Hassop. Status report on the evacuation." My communicator crackled with static before clearing. "Evacuation of Sector 7 is at 80%. We need another 10 minutes. I looked at the sealed breach, already hearing more scratching sounds from beyond. "You have 5. Make it count." We'd been assigned to protect the evacuation of one of our last remaining population centers. The civilians were being moved to underground bunkers that had been built during our ancient wars. Once, we'd thought those bunkers could withstand anything. Now we knew better. Hassop. It was General Krelthaw's voice on a private channel. "Status update from High Command. You need to hear this." I motioned for Talrin to take point while I moved to a slightly more secure position. "Go ahead, sir." "The Andari Alliance has formally declined our request for military aid." The general's voice was tight with controlled anger. "They've closed their borders and declared neutrality." I felt my jaw clench. The Andari had been our closest allies for generations. We'd fought alongside them in the spiral conflicts, had bled with them against the Mechanovar incursion. "The Trade Federation?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "The same. They're citing containment protocols. They've quarantined our entire sector." Another explosion rocked the building. Through my tactical display, I could see more devourers converging on our position. Always more. "The Krell, the Extari, the Mindweavers?" I was naming our allies now, species we'd helped, traded with, protected. I've just pulled it off the top of my head. I have, upon my word, so much information that I can't say it without affection, that these devils that they've captured, and I'm going to provide with as much training as they attain to such a quick flight that their allies believe that if they intervene, they'll be next. I fired a burst through a crumbling section of wall, hearing a satisfying shriek in response. "They'll be next anyway. The devourers won't stop with us." "They know. But fear makes cowards of us all." Another explosion, closer this time. Through my enhancers, I could see civilians still streaming toward the bunker entrances. Too many, too slow. "Sir," I said, marking another group of devourers on my tactical display, "there are rumors about another option." The silence that followed was heavy with understanding. "You mean the humans?" "Yes, sir. The Defense Council is, considering it. But you understand what that would mean. The humans are..." He struggled for words. "They're dangerous, Hassop. Unpredictable. There's a reason we've maintained our distance from their space." A massive impact shook the entire building. Support beams groaned in protest. Through the walls, I could hear the hungry roars getting closer. "Sir, with all due respect," I said, switching to my heavy plasma rifle as my team took up defensive positions. "I've spent 2 weeks fighting the devourers. I've seen what they do to prisoners, to civilians, to children." I paused, checking my weapon's charge. At this point, I don't care if the humans are dangerous. I don't care if they can fight. The general was quiet for a long moment. In that silence, I could hear gunfire, explosions, screams, the sounds of my world die. "The council meets again tomorrow," he said finally. Make your perspective known." "Thank you, sir. Now, if you'll excuse me," I said, watching as the wall before us began to crack. "We have company." I closed the channel and readied my weapon. Around me, my team did the same. We were Nightblades, the elite of the Dren military. We'd fought in shadows and struck from darkness and won battles against impossible odds. But as the walls came down and the devourers poured in, their hunger-filled roars drowning out all other sound, I knew that all our training, all our technology, all our courage wouldn't be enough. We needed help. We needed the humans. I just hoped we'd live long enough to see them arrive. "Hold the line!" I roared over the tactical channel, my plasma rifle's whine mixing with the screech of devourer claws on metal. "They do not pass this point." We'd been fighting for 10 hours straight, defending one of our last remaining munitions factories. 10 hours of constant combat, of watching good soldiers die, of falling back step by bloody step. My team had started with 20 Nightblades. We were down to 8. The factory's defense systems had been formidable once. Now they were just burning wreckage, torn apart by waves of devourer shock troops. We'd turned the manufacturing floor into our last stand, using the heavy machinery as cover. The air was thick with ozone from energy weapons and the acidic stench of devourer blood. "Incoming transmission," Talon called out between bursts of fire. "High Command, Priority 1. I ducked behind a massive forge as devourer fire splashed against the metal. "Put it through." General Krelthar's voice cut through the chaos. "Nightblade Hassop, you're ordered to fall back to secondary command immediately. The Defense Council has made their decision." I fired another burst, watching with grim satisfaction as a devourer fell. "With respect, sir, we're a bit busy. This position is already lost," the general cut in. "Like everything else outside the inner defense ring. Fall back now. That's an order." I looked around at what remained of my team. They were exhausted, running on stims and determination, but they were still fighting, still killing. "Sir, we can hold. They're contacting the humans." The words hit me like a physical blow. Around me, my team's fire stuttered as they processed what they'd heard. "Everyone fall back by teams," I ordered, switching to my backup weapon to lay down covering fire. "Talaran, take point, move." We fought our way out of the factory, level by level, leaving behind explosive presents for our pursuers. The devourers followed, of course. They always followed, but they were more cautious now, having learned that cornered Nightblades were at their most dangerous. 3 hours and 2 more casualties later, we finally reached secondary command. The massive underground bunker was a hive of activity, filled with military personnel and civilian leadership. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut. General Krelthar met us personally. His usually immaculate uniform was wrinkled, his eyes sunken from lack of sleep. "Walk with me," he said, leading me away from my team. We moved through crowded corridors, past rooms filled with tactical displays showing the steady advance of devourer forces. The general stopped at a small observation deck overlooking the command center. "What do you know about humans?" he asked without preamble. I checked my weapon out of habit before answering. "The stories everyone knows, that they're aggressive, unpredictable, that they fought wars among themselves for most of their history, that when they reached space, the older races tried to contain them." The general nodded. "What else?" "That they fought their way out of that containment, that they..." I hesitated, remembering the whispered conversations, the warnings passed down through generations, that they did things during those wars that made even the Mindweavers afraid. "Yes." Kreltar's voice was quiet. "The Battle of Proxima, the Durham Maneuver, the Ghost Fleet at Tau Ceti. Humans don't just fight wars, Hassop. They master them. They turn violence into an art form." He turned to face me. "Did you know they have over 300 words just for different types of warfare?" I shook my head. The species we fear most, the ones like the Mindweavers and the Vixtari, they're afraid of humans because humans are unpredictable. But that's not why I fear them. He gestured at a tactical display, showing yet another devourer advance. I fear them because they're exactly like us, just more. They feel everything we feel, but deeper. They fight like we fight, but harder. They plan like we plan, but better. Sir, I said, checking my team's status on my tactical display. Right now, that sounds exactly like what we need. The general laughed, but there was no humor in it. Yes, that's what the council finally admitted. We're sending a diplomatic mission to their space, specifically to something called the United States and Planets. With them? I thought humans had multiple governments. They do. But the USP, as they call it, they're the ones with the most powerful military force, something called the Heavy Marines. He shook his head. The records we have on them are concerning. Before I could ask what he meant, alarms began blaring throughout the complex. My tactical display lit up with new warnings. Sir, I said, already checking my weapon, the devourers have breached the outer perimeter. The general nodded grimly. Get back to your team, Nightblade. Buy us time. The diplomatic mission launches in 1 hour, and it must get through. I turned to go, but he caught my arm. Gudrun, if you help me make this happen, my job will only be to figure out how. But if the humans agree to help, if we play our hands well, we can make this transition without hassle. He struggled for words. Be ready for anything, because whatever the humans do, it won't be like anything we've seen before. I nodded and ran to rejoin my team. As I moved through the corridors, I thought about what the general had said. About humans being like us, but more. About their mastery of warfare. About being ready for anything. An explosion rocked the complex. Through my enhancers, I could see the first waves of devourers pushing through our defenses. Whatever the humans might be, whatever they might do, it had to be better than this. It had to be better than watching our world, our people being devoured piece by piece. And if the humans were really as terrifying as everyone said, well, maybe that's exactly what we needed. They've breached level 6, Taryn's voice crackled through my comm as another explosion shook the command bunker. We're falling back to the emergency barriers. I ducked behind a fallen support beam, switching power cells in my plasma rifle. 5 days since the diplomatic mission had launched. 5 days of holding secondary command against endless waves of devourers. 5 days of waiting for word, any word, about whether the humans would help. Status report, I demanded, marking another group of devourers on our tactical net. 3 more sections lost in the last hour, Talon replied. They're pushing hard on the eastern quadrant. Engineering says the barriers won't hold much longer. I cursed under my breath. We'd lost half the command bunker already, falling back level by level. What remained of my Nightblade team was spread thin, supporting the regular defense forces at critical choke points. We'd turned every corridor into a killing ground, every intersection into a fortress. But it wasn't enough. It was never enough. My tactical display flickered as another update came in from High Command. More territory lost, more cities fallen, more people consumed. The devourers were accelerating their assault, as if they knew we were reaching out for help, as if they were trying to finish us before it could arrive. Nightblade Hassop. General Krelthar's voice cut through the tactical chatter. Report to command and control immediately. Sir, we're in the middle of... Now, Hassop, we have news. I signaled to my second. Talarin, you have tactical command. Hold them as long as you can. Like we have a choice? He fired another burst down the corridor. "Go! Find out if we're getting help or planning our last stand." I moved through the bunker's remaining secure sections, past exhausted soldiers and frightened civilians. The command center was dimmer than usual, running on backup power after the devourers had taken out our main reactors. General Krelthar stood before a massive display screen, surrounded by what remained of our military leadership. "Sir," I said, not bothering to salute. We had abandoned such formalities days ago. The general turned. He looked older than when I'd last seen him, but there was something in his eyes, something that looked almost like hope. "The diplomatic mission made contact," he said without preamble. "They reached the United States and planet's capital world. They were granted an immediate audience with their military leadership." I felt my heart skip a beat. "And?" "The humans," he paused, consulting a datapad. "The humans listened to our plea, watched our footage of the devourers, asked exactly 3 questions. A distant explosion rattled the command center. Nobody flinched. We'd grown used to them." "What questions?" I asked. "First, they asked if we had tried to surrender to the devourers. When we explained that the devourers don't take surrenders, only prisoners to be consumed later, they nodded." He looked down at his notes. "Second, they asked if we had exhausted all diplomatic options with our traditional allies. We showed them the rejection notices. Another explosion, closer this time. Warning indicators flashed on the tactical displays." "And the third question?" The general actually smiled. It was a grim expression, but it was the first smile I'd seen in weeks. "They asked how quickly we needed them to respond." My tactical display lit up with new alerts. The devourers had broken through another defense line. They were pushing toward the command center. "Sir," I said, checking my weapon, "what was our answer?" "We told them we needed help immediately, that our civilization was on the brink of extinction." He looked at the tactical displays, at the red indicators showing devourer advances. The response was unexpected. "How so?" "They laughed." The general shook his head in wonder. Their commanding officer, something called a fleet admiral, actually laughed. Then he said, "Well, boys and girls, looks like we've got ourselves a bug hunt. Suit up." Before I could respond, alarms blared throughout the command center. On the main display, new contacts were appearing, hundreds of them, emerging from hyperspace at the edge of our system. For a moment my heart stopped. More devourers? Had they called in reinforcements to finish us off? But these ships were different. Geometric, angular, built not to inspire fear but to deliver it. They moved with mechanical precision, spreading out in attack formations that spoke of countless battles and absolute confidence. "Sir," one of the sensor operators called out, "we're receiving a transmission. It's being broadcast on all frequencies, in the clear." "Put it through," the general ordered. A voice filled the command center, a human voice speaking our language with an odd accent but perfect clarity. "Attention Dren forces. This is Admiral Krupp of the United States 1st Expeditionary Fleet. We got your message. Sorry for the delay. Had to grab the good toys. Heavy marine dropships are inbound to your coordinates. Suggest you mark any friendly positions and get your heads down. Things are about to get loud." I stared at the display, watching as smaller ships detached from the human fleet. Dropships, the Admiral had called them. They burned through our atmosphere like meteors, their hulls glowing with re-entry heat. "Sir," I said, still watching the display, "should we be concerned about these heavy marines?" The general looked at me, and that grim smile was back. Probably, but not as concerned as the devourers should be. He checked his own tactical display. "Get back to your team, Nightblade. I have a feeling we're about to see why everyone in the galaxy fears the humans." I nodded and turned to go, but not before seeing more ships emerge from hyperspace. Larger ships, ships that dwarfed anything in our fleet. Ships built for one purpose: war. As I ran back to my position, I heard the Admiral's voice again, speaking to his own forces this time. "All units, weapons free. Let's show these folks why you don't mess with humanity's neighbors." The humans had come, and they hadn't come to help. They'd come to hunt. The first warning we had was the floor shaking. Not from explosions, we'd grown used to those, but from impact. Heavy impacts, as if mountains were dropping from orbit. "Multiple contacts," Terran called out. "Large signatures landing all around the command bunker." Through my enhancers, I could see them. Massive pods, each easily the size of a Dren assault vehicle, smashing into the ground around our position. They weren't landing so much as they were being fired into the planet's surface, burying themselves halfway into the rock. The devourers had noticed too. They were pulling back from their advance, regrouping. For the first time since the invasion began, they seemed hesitant. "Aldren forces, this is Admiral Krupp," the human commander's voice came through our comms. "Heavy Marine pod drop complete. Suggest you get to cover. These boys and girls like to make an entrance." Before I could process what that meant, the pods exploded. No, not exploded, opened. Each pod's exterior burst outward in a perfectly controlled detonation, and from within, all the shadows of Drenthul. They were huge. Each heavy Marine stood at least 3 meters tall, encased in armor that made our most advanced battlesuits look like civilian clothing. They moved with a fluid grace that seemed impossible for their size, heavy weapons integrated directly into their armor. "United States Heavy Marines." A new voice boomed across all frequencies. "Lock and load. We've got bugs to burn." The Marines charged forward, and I finally understood why the galaxy feared humans. They didn't move like soldiers, they didn't move like warriors, they moved like forces of nature. Their armor, which I had thought was just protective gear, was actually a fully integrated weapons platform. Every Marine was effectively a walking tank, bristling with weapons that made our heaviest guns look like toys. "Holy," Towland whispered as we watched a single Marine engage 3 devourers simultaneously. The aliens that had been terrorizing us for weeks, that had eaten through our defenses like they were nothing, suddenly looked small. The Marines' armor shrugged off their attacks like rain, while its return fire, I had to dial back my enhancers to avoid being blinded. Some kind of plasma weapon, but far more advanced than anything we had. "This is Captain Rachel Kilroy, Heavy Marines 1st Division," a woman's voice cut through our tactical net. "We're taking point on this dance. Local forces, fall back to defensive positions and provide targeting data. We'll handle the heavy lifting." I watched as more Marines joined the battle. They moved in perfect coordination, their tactics unlike anything I'd seen before. They didn't try to avoid the Devourers' attacks. They welcomed them, their armor easily absorbing hits that would have vaporized our best troops. "Sir," one of my Nightblades called out, Are we really needed here anymore?" It was a fair question. In the space of minutes, the heavy Marines had pushed the Devourers back further than we had managed in days of fighting. Their advance was methodical, precise, and utterly unstoppable. "Ow, units, this is Nightblade Hassop," I said into the tactical net. "Fall back to designated support positions. Provide targeting data and situational updates to heavy marine units." As we moved to our new positions, I kept my enhancers focused on the Marines. Their armor wasn't just tough, it was smart. I could see it adapting to the devourers' attacks in real time, adjusting shield frequencies and weapon outputs for maximum effect. "Impressive, aren't they?" General Krelthar's voice came through my private channel. "The humans call that armor the Mark 7 Aegis combat system. Each suit costs more than a small starship." I watched as a Marine literally caught a devourer's striking claw in one armored hand, then used its own momentum to throw it into its companions before obliterating all three with a weapon that seemed to ignore physical space entirely. "Sir," I replied, "I'm starting to think we should have called them sooner." A dark chuckle. "Perhaps, but watch closely, Nightblade. You're seeing something few non-humans ever witness: humanity's full military might unleashed." He was right. This wasn't just a rescue mission. This wasn't even just a military operation. This was humanity showing the galaxy why they were feared, why the older races had tried to contain them, why even the Mind Weavers gave their space a wide berth. Because humans didn't just fight wars. They mastered them. "Hell, heavy Marine units, this is Captain Kilroy. Phase 1 complete, command bunker perimeter secured. Moving to Phase 2, total bug extermination. Let's show these devourers why you don't mess with humanity's friends." I marked another group of devourers for the Marines, watching as they were systematically destroyed. For the first time since the invasion began, I felt something other than grim determination or desperate hope. I felt pity. Not for us. Not anymore. For the devourers. Because they were about to learn what the rest of the galaxy already knew. There are things far more terrifying than hunger in this universe. And humanity was chief among them. From my observation post high in the cliffs of the Valley of Shadows, I watched as humanity's war machine arrived in full force. The heavy Marines' initial deployment had been impressive enough, but this was something else entirely. "Tactical update," Tollern reported from his position. "Over 2,000 human ships have entered the system in the last hour alone, still more arriving." Through my enhancers, I could see them. The United States and Planet's fleet was unlike anything in our records. Their ships moved with perfect precision, forming battle groups that spoke of centuries of naval doctrine. But it wasn't just their numbers or their formation that caught my attention. It was their design. Every ship, from the smallest corvette to the massive dreadnoughts, was built for war. No wasted space. No aesthetic flourishes, no compromise between form and function. These were weapons, pure and simple, crewed by a species that had turned warfare into an art form. "Drin forces, this is Admiral Krupp." The now familiar voice came through our comms. "Hope you enjoyed the appetizer. Main course is about to be served." The sky above our world lit up as thousands of dropships began their descent. Not just heavy Marines this time, though there were plenty of those, but an entire invasion force. Tanks that made our heaviest armor look like toys. Artillery pieces that seemed to bend space itself. Aircraft that moved with impossible agility. "Sir?" One of my Nightblades called out, What are those?" I adjusted my enhancers to follow his gaze. Massive shapes were emerging from the largest human ships, each one bigger than our largest buildings. As they entered the atmosphere, their true forms became clear. Titans! General Krelthar's voice came through our comms, filled with awe. The humans call them Titans, mobile fortress platforms. Each one carries enough firepower to level a city. We watched as the first Titan touched down several kilometers from our position. It was a mountain of metal and energy weapons, walking on legs that could crush our largest tanks. Its mere presence seemed to make the air vibrate with potential violence. "This is Colonel Jeff George, 1st Titan Legion," a new voice announced. "All ground forces be advised, establishing fire support zones, marking safe corridors now. If you're not in a green zone, get to one fast. Things are about to get very warm." The Titans opened fire. I had thought I understood what overwhelming firepower meant. I had been wrong. The Titans' weapons turned entire swaths of our world into plasma, systematically eliminating every devourer position their senses could detect. The precision was as impressive as the power. Human forces in their marked safe zones were completely untouched. And the Admiral defense has to be broken on the world's joints. For 4 seasons of Public Enemy and the lives of those who arrive on the ships for the first time commits humanity's patience. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Heavy Marines advanced in perfect formation, their armor shrugging off anything the devourers could throw at them. Human tanks rolled forward in endless columns, their weapons firing with devastating effect. Aircraft filled the sky, hunting down any devourers trying to escape. And through it all, the Titans walked, their massive weapons reducing anything in their path to atoms. "Nightblade Hassap," Captain Kilroy's voice came through my private channel, "got a job for you and your team if you're interested." "What do you need, Captain?" "We're pushing these bugs back, but some of them are trying to go to ground in the cave systems. Need your expertise in the shadows to help us flush them out. You up for some hunting?" I looked at my team. Despite everything we'd been through, I could see the eager glint in their eyes. We were Nightblades. The shadows were our domain. "We're ready, Captain. Just try to keep up." She laughed, the sound somehow both friendly and terrifying. "Oh, I like you, Nightblade. Link up with my squad at these coordinates. Let's go show these bugs why they shouldn't have come to your world." As we moved to join the Heavy Marines, I caught one last glimpse of the human fleet through a break in the clouds. More ships were still arriving, each one bristling with weapons. The humans hadn't just come to help us. They'd come to make a statement. "Impressive, isn't it?" Terran asked as we ran. "No wonder the galaxy fears them." I nodded, thinking about how quickly everything had changed. A week ago, we had been on the brink of extinction. Now we were watching the most powerful military force in the galaxy systematically dismantling our invaders. "You know what the scariest part is?" I said, checking my weapon as we approached the rendezvous point. "I don't think this is even their full strength. The humans are holding back." Talon glanced at me. "Holding back? Why?" I watched as another Titan obliterated a devourer hive cluster with almost casual ease. Because they don't need to show everything they can do. This isn't just about saving us, it's about sending a message to the galaxy. "What message?" "Oh, humanity doesn't need to be feared." I paused as we reached the Heavy Marine position. "They need to be respected. Because when they say they'll protect their friends, they mean it." Captain Kilroy's massive armored form turned toward us. "Ready to hunt some bugs, Nightblades?" I checked my team one last time, then nodded. "Lead the way, Captain. The shadows are waiting." And for the first time since the invasion began, those shadows felt like allies again. "Movement detected," I whispered into the tactical net. Large devourers swarm, heading northwest through the Crimson Canyon, at least 300 of them. From my hidden position in the canyon walls, I watched through my enhancers as the devourers moved below. They were being more cautious now, trying to use the terrain for cover. It was strange seeing them like this, the hunters becoming the hunted. "Confirmed. Nightblade." Captain Kilroy's response was immediate. "Good work on the scout. Now, watch how we handle an infestation." The heavy Marines had spent the last hour setting up what they called a kill box in the canyon. I'd helped them identify the best positions, but the tactics they were employing were unlike anything I'd seen before. "L units, execute Operation Pest Control," Kilroy ordered. "Show them why you don't corner a bug with a Marine." The first indication the devourers had that something was wrong was when the canyon walls lit up. Dozens of heavy Marines deactivated their stealth systems simultaneously, their massive armor suddenly visible in positions that completely surrounded the swarm. But they weren't firing. Not yet. "Target area marked," a Marine called out. "Titan support incoming." The sky darkened as a Titan stepped into position at the canyon's edge, its massive form blocking out the sun. The devourers immediately tried to scatter, their animal instincts finally overriding their hunger. They were too late. "Fire for effect," Colonel George's voice boomed across the tactical net. The Titan's weapons spoke. I had to dial my enhancers back to minimum sensitivity as the canyon erupted in light and energy. The Titan wasn't just firing into the swarm. It was systematically cutting off every escape route, herding the devourers exactly where the heavy Marines wanted them. "Gridlock," Kilroy announced. "Light 'em up, Marines." What followed wasn't a battle. It was an extermination. Every Marine opened fire simultaneously, their weapons coordinated for maximum effect. Some fired weapons that ignored physical space, reaching through dimensions to strike their targets. Others used more conventional energy weapons, but at power levels that made our best guns look like children's toys. The devourers tried to fight back. They leapt and clawed and struck with the same ferocity that had torn through our best defenses. But against the heavy Marines, they might as well have been throwing pebbles at a battleship. "Sir," Taryn's voice was filled with awe. "Those weapons, they're not just killing the devourers, they're unmaking them." He was right. The Marines' weapons weren't just causing physical damage, they were breaking down the devourers at a molecular level. Each shot seemed designed to counter the aliens' notorious ability to adapt and regenerate. "That's the point," Kilroy said, her armored form stepping out onto a ledge. "We studied the data you sent about their biology. These weapons were specifically calibrated during our trip here, custom designed for devouring devourers." I watched as a particularly large devourer, easily twice the size of its brethren, charged directly at Kilroy's position. The creature had taken direct hits from our heaviest weapons before, without slowing down. Kilroy didn't even take a step back. She raised one arm, and her armor reconfigured itself, forming a weapon I'd never seen before. "Say hello to human ingenuity, Bug," she said, almost cheerfully. The weapon fired once. The beam it emitted seemed to bend reality itself, and the massive devourer came apart. Not in an explosion, not in pieces, but in layers, as if it was being systematically disassembled from the atomic level up. "Holy," one of my Nightblades whispered. "Just basic quantum disassembly," Kilroy said casually, her armor already moving to target another group. We figured if these things like to take things apart and consume them, we'd show them how it's really done. The battle, if you could call it that, lasted less than 10 minutes. When it was over, nothing remained of the devourer swarm except rapidly dissipating particles. Area cleared, Kilroy reported. Colonel, you can move the Titan to the next grid. We'll clean up any stragglers. I watched as the massive war machine stepped away, its footfalls shaking the ground. Even through the solid rock of the canyon walls, the heavy Marines were already moving to new positions, their armor showing no signs of damage despite the intense combat. Nightblade, Kilroy called out, got another sector that needs scanning. Your people up for more hunting? I looked at my team. Despite everything we'd just witnessed, or perhaps because of it, they were eager to continue. We were warriors after all, and for the first time since this war began, we were on the winning side. Always ready, Captain, I replied. Just one question. Shoot. Those weapons, that armor, why didn't you develop these capabilities earlier? Surely the humans have faced threats before. Kilroy's helmet turned toward me, and I could almost hear the smile in her voice. Oh, we have. But here's the thing about humanity, Nightblade. We never show all our cards at once. These toys? They're just what we came up with on the flight over. Wait until you see what we do once we really get creative. As we moved out to our next objective, I thought about her words. The humans hadn't just brought overwhelming force to this war. They'd brought innovation, adaptation, and a terrifying capacity for developing new ways to fight. The devourers had thought they were the ultimate predators in the galaxy. They were just learning how wrong they were. Multiple contacts, I reported through the tactical net. Devourer command cluster in the ruins of central processing. They're building something. Through my enhancers, I could see the devourers swarming over the wreckage of what had once been our largest industrial complex. They were reshaping the ruins, converting them into something organic and horrifying. This was different from their usual destruction. This was purposeful. Confirmed, Nightblade. Captain Kilroy's response was immediate. What are we looking at? Some kind of structure, biological. They're incorporating our technology into it. Never seen them do this before. They're adapting, Kilroy said, a note of professional interest in her voice. Good. Means they're scared enough to try something new. Colonel George, you getting this? Affirmative, Captain. The Titan commander's voice rumbled through the net. Admiral Krupp, requesting permission to initiate Protocol Thunderstrike. Permission granted, Colonel. Captain Kilroy, get your Marines in position. Let's show these bugs what a real adaptive response looks like. I watched as the heavy Marines moved into position with impossible speed and silence, their advanced armor making no sound despite its size. My team had spent the last week working alongside them, providing reconnaissance and local expertise, and they still managed to surprise us with their capabilities. Nightblade, Kilroy called. Pull your team back to minimum safe distance. This is going to get, enthusiastic. We retreated to our designated position just as the first Titans came into view, 3 of them moving with perfect coordination despite their massive size. But they weren't alone. Human tanks and artillery had taken position around the entire perimeter, and in the sky, holy shadows, Talon whispered. Are those? Orbital strikes incoming, Admiral Krupp announced. All units prepare for synchronized assault. Operation Clean Sweep commences in 3, 2, 1. The sky opened. Beams of light fell from the human fleet in orbit, each one precisely targeted. But they weren't striking the devourer position directly. They were striking in a pattern, creating a perfect geometric grid that trapped the aliens in place. Then the Titans opened fire. Each one had different weapons, I realized. One fired beams that seemed to ignore physical space entirely. Another launched projectiles that exploded into clouds of microscopic machines that devoured anything they touched. The third somehow bent gravity itself, crushing whole sections of the ruins into singularities. "And kill McMain, execute Maneuver 7, Kilroy ordered. The Marines moved in perfect synchronization, their armor reconfiguring as they charged. Some turned nearly invisible, their stealth systems far more advanced than anything we'd ever developed. Others seemed to phase partially out of reality, becoming ghost-like as they passed through solid matter. Still others simply charged straight in, their armor shrugging off anything the desperate devourers threw at them. "Sir," one of my Nightblades called out, "the structure they were building, it's changing." He was right. The biological construct was shifting, trying to adapt to the human assault. Spines and tentacles erupted from its surface, organic weapons forming and firing wildly. "Oh, no you don't," Kilroy said. "Deploying countermeasures." Every Marine simultaneously activated something in their armor. The air itself seemed to vibrate, and suddenly the devourer's structures stopped adapting. It froze in mid-transformation, its biological components seeming to forget how to change. "Adaptive suppression field engaged," a Marine reported. "They're locked in their current configuration." "Thank you for standing still," Colonel George said. "Titan units, execute final bombardment." What followed wasn't just destruction, it was erasure. The Titans fired in perfect harmony, their weapons complementing each other in ways that spoke of deep understanding of physics we'd never even imagined. The Devourer's structure, their remaining forces, even the ruins themselves, all of it was systematically reduced to component atoms. "Area sanitized," Kilroy reported. "No surviving biological signatures detected. Admiral, ready to move to the next sector." "Good work, people!" Admiral Krupp sounded satisfied. "Nightblade Hussup, your team up for some more hunting?" I looked at my Nightblades. Despite everything we'd seen, despite being reduced to what essentially amounted to scouts for the human forces, they were eager to continue. This was still our world after all, and we were still warriors. "Always ready, Admiral," I replied. "Where do you need us?" "Got reports of devourer activity in the eastern mountain range, probably trying to set up another one of their little science projects. Get your people in position and paint us a target. We'll handle the rest." As we moved out, I couldn't help but marvel at how completely the situation had changed. 2 weeks ago, we had been fighting for survival against an unstoppable enemy. Now, we were watching that same enemy being systematically hunted to extinction by forces that made them look primitive in comparison. "Sir," Terran said as we ran, "do you think the Devourers regret coming here, now that they've seen what humanity can do?" I thought about the precision of the orbital strikes, the devastating power of the Titans, the seemingly impossible capabilities of the heavy Marines. "I don't think they regret coming here," I replied. "I don't think they're capable of regret. But I think they're learning, something that the rest of the galaxy already knew." "What's that?" "There's always a bigger predator, and humanity, the biggest predator of all." Ahead of us, more Titans were moving into position. More Marines were deploying, more human ships were arriving in orbit. The counteroffensive wasn't just pushing the Devourers back, it was erasing them from existence with a thoroughness that was both terrifying and awe-inspiring. The humans hadn't just come to save us. They'd come to make an example. and the galaxy was watching. Multiple contacts heading for their carrier ships, I reported from my observation post. The devourers are in full retreat. They're abandoning everything, weapons, resources, even their own wounded. Through my enhancers, I watched as the once mighty alien army fled through the wastes of what had been our eastern agricultural zone. A month ago, this would have been cause for celebration. Now, it was just another target designation. Confirmed, Nightblade. Admiral Krupp's voice was calm, almost casual. Captain Kilroy, Colonel George, would you like to demonstrate why retreat isn't an option? Thought you'd never ask, Admiral. Kilroy's reply held that now familiar tone of professional enthusiasm. Heavy Marines, execute pursuit pattern Delta. Show these bugs why you don't turn your back on humanity. The Marines moved like lightning, their armor allowing them to cross terrain that would have bogged down any conventional force. They didn't just chase the devourers, they herded them, using precisely calculated movements to force the aliens exactly where they wanted them. Titan support moving into position, Colonel George reported. Grid coordinates locked, ready to close the trap. I watched as 3 Titans emerged from their holding positions, cutting off the devourers' escape route to space. The aliens tried to change direction, only to find more Marines appearing ahead of them, weapons ready. Sir, Terran called through our tactical link, orbital scans show their main fleet trying to power up hyperdrives. Oh, we can't have that, Krupp said, initiating Operation Cage Match. The human fleet in orbit moved with that same terrible precision I'd grown accustomed to seeing. Ships took position in a complex 3-dimensional grid and then... Deploying interdiction field, Krupp announced. Local space is now locked down. No one's going anywhere without our permission. The devourers' ships tried anyway. I watched through my enhancers as their organic vessels attempted to force their way through whatever the humans had done to local space. The results were... messy. Looks like they want to do this the hard way, Kilroy commented. Colonel, care to demonstrate our new toy? Gladly, Captain. All Titan units deploy quantum cascade weapons. The Titan's weapon systems reconfigured themselves, forming patterns that hurt to look at directly. What happened next defied description. It was as if reality itself decided to stop cooperating with the devourers. Their ships began to come apart, not through explosion or impact, but through what looked like selective probability manipulation. Systems failed in impossible ways. Organic components forgot how to maintain molecular cohesion. Weapons turned inside out. Well, would you look at that, Kilroy said with satisfaction. Turns out these bugs don't do so well when you reorganize probability around them. Who knew? The devourers on the ground were faring no better, caught between the Titans and the heavy Marines. With their escape route to space cut off, they were being systematically eliminated with almost surgical precision. All units be advised, Krupp announced. Long-range sensors show more devourer forces attempting to regroup in the Outer Rim territories. Looks like they're trying to establish a fallback position. Not for long, Kilroy replied. Nightblade, feel like taking a little trip? These bugs think they know how to hide in the dark. Let's show them what real hunters can do. I looked at my team. We'd spent the last month working alongside the heavy Marines, learning their tactics, adapting our own skills to complement their overwhelming force. We'd gone from fighting for survival to being part of the most effective hunting force the galaxy had ever seen. Always ready, Captain, I responded, though I have to admit there's not much left for us to do except point you at the targets. Kilroy laughed. Don't sell yourself short, Nightblade. Your team's recon work has cut our engagement times in half. Besides, her armored form turned to face my position. Someone needs to be around to tell the story of how humanity goes hunting. As if to emphasize her point, another group of devourer ships tried to break through the interdiction field. The results were just as spectacular as the first attempt. Speaking of hunting, Colonel George cut in. These strays are starting to bore me. Marines, execute final sweep. Let's wrap this up and go find their friends. What followed wasn't a battle. It was an execution. The Marines moved with perfect coordination, their weapons systematically eliminating every last devourer. The Titans provided support, their impossible weapons ensuring nothing escaped. "Area cleared," Kilroy reported. "No survivors. Admiral, ready to move to the next sector." "Good work, people," Krupp sounded pleased. "Prepare for orbital transit. Let's go show these bugs what happens when you try to hide from humanity." As we prepared for transport to the human ships, I watched the cleanup crews move in. They weren't just eliminating devourer remains. They were cleansing the very ground of their presence, using technologies that seemed to rewrite reality itself. "Sir?" Torrin said quietly, "do you remember when we thought the devourers were the most terrifying thing in the galaxy?" I nodded, watching as a Marine casually demolished a devourer carrier ship by apparently convincing local physics to take a holiday. "We were wrong," I replied. "We were so very wrong." Above us, the human fleet prepared for transit, their ships reconfiguring into attack formations that spoke of countless wars and absolute confidence. The hunt was on. And the devourers were about to learn why humanity had been left alone for so long. They weren't being ignored. They were being avoided. "Well, would you look at that?" Captain Kilroy said, her armored form towering beside me as we observed the devourer's final stronghold. "Looks like the bugs decided to get creative." Creative was one way to put it. The devourers had transformed an entire asteroid into their last bastion, turning the massive rock into a twisted combination of organic hive and technological fortress. Through my enhancers, I could see how they'd incorporated stolen technology from dozens of worlds, desperate attempts to find something, anything, that could stand against humanity's relentless advance. "Nightblade team in position," I reported through the tactical net. "We're reading at least 50,000 devourer signatures inside that structure. This is it, their entire remaining force." We'd spent the last 2 months hunting them across the sector. Every time we'd cornered a group, they'd fled toward this position. Now we knew why. "Good work on the recon," Admiral Krupp's voice came through clear, despite the interference from the asteroid's defenses. "Colonel George, your assessment?" "They've turned it into one giant weapon, Admiral." The Titan commander's voice was thoughtful. "Biological and technological hybridization on a scale we haven't seen from them before. They're learning." "Too late for that," Kilroy commented. "Nightblade, your team gotten everything we need?" I checked the data we gathered during our infiltration. The humans could have scanned the asteroid from orbit, of course, but they'd learned to trust our expertise in close-quarters reconnaissance. "Confirmed, Captain. We've mapped their primary defense nodes and located what appears to be their central nervous system. The whole structure is effectively one massive organism." "Now that's just showing off," Kilroy said with a chuckle. "Admiral, request permission to demonstrate why bigger isn't always better." "Granted, Captain. All units, prepare for Operation Endgame. Let's finish this." The human fleet moved into position around the asteroid, their ships forming geometric patterns that my tactical systems couldn't quite process. The Titans deployed from their carriers, taking up positions that seemed random, until I realized they were creating some kind of multi-dimensional firing solution. "Sir," Taryn called out, The structure, it's moving. The asteroid fortress was indeed shifting, its surface rippling as organic and mechanical weapons emerged from hidden ports. The devourers had clearly put everything they had into this last defense. "Cute," Kilroy said. "They think they can outgun us? Marines, show them what real firepower looks like." Every heavy Marine unit opened fire simultaneously. But they weren't aiming at the fortress. They were shooting into seemingly empty space around it. For a moment, nothing happened. Then reality caught fire. "Quantum cascade initiated," Colonel George reported calmly. "Probability matrix established, beginning systematic deconstruction." The space around the asteroid began to warp and twist. The devourers' weapons fired wildly, but their shots curved away harmlessly, caught in whatever impossible physics the humans had deployed. "Titans, execute maneuver Omega," George ordered. "Let's take this thing apart piece by piece." The massive war machines moved with perfect coordination, their weapons linking together to create effects that strained my enhancement's ability to process. Sections of the asteroid began to simply cease existing, not destroyed, but rather convinced that they'd never been there in the first place. The devourers tried to adapt, their hybrid fortress shifting and changing to counter each new attack. But the humans had anticipated this. "Deploying adaptation suppressors," Kilroy announced. "Locking their configuration. Now." The fortress froze mid-transformation, caught in a field that somehow prevented the very concept of change. The devourers' greatest advantage, their ability to adapt and evolve, had been turned against them. "All units, prepare for final assault," Krupp ordered. "Captain Kilroy, you have point." "With pleasure, Admiral." She turned to me. "Care to join us for the finale, Nightblade? Seems fitting to have you there for the end." I looked at my team. We'd been through hell together, first fighting the devourers alone, then watching in awe as humanity showed us what real warfare looked like. Now we had a chance to be part of their final victory. "We're with you, Captain." The assault was both beautiful and terrifying to witness. Heavy Marines phased through solid matter to breach the fortress's outer layers. Titans systematically erased entire sections with weapons that ignored conventional physics. The human fleet maintained their geometric formation, doing something to space itself that made my enhancers shut down rather than try to process it. And through it all, my team moved alongside the Marines, our knowledge of close-quarters combat complementing their overwhelming force. We weren't the primary combatants anymore. That role belonged solely to the humans, but we could still contribute. "Central chamber breached," Kilroy reported. "Looks like we found their leadership cast. Time to end this." The Devourer leaders were massive, easily 3 times the size of their soldiers. They fought with desperate fury, combining stolen technology with their natural weapons in ways that would have been unstoppable against any other force. Against the heavy Marines, they lasted less than a minute. "Area secured," Kilroy announced. "No survivors. Admiral, the fortress is ours." "Excellent work, people." Krupp's voice held satisfaction. "Colonel, please ensure this structure can never be used again." "Gladly, Admiral." The Titans took up new positions, initiating total conversion. What followed wasn't an explosion or destruction, it was erasure. The entire asteroid, along with everything on it, was systematically reduced to its component atoms, then scattered across space itself. "Operation Endgame complete," Krupp announced. "The Devourer threat has been eliminated." I stood with my team, watching as the humans methodically cleaned up after their victory. They were already preparing to help rebuild the worlds the Devourers had ravaged. their terrible weapons being reconfigured for construction rather than destruction. "Hard to believe it's over," Terran said quietly. I nodded, watching as Kilroy coordinated with other Marine units. The devourers thought they were invincible. They thought nothing could stop them. I paused, remembering how desperate we'd been before humanity arrived. They never considered that there might be predators bigger than them. "Sir," one of my Nightblades called out, "Captain Kilroy is requesting our assistance with the cleanup operation." I checked my weapon, a gesture that had become habit over the months of fighting. "Well then, let's not keep her waiting. We've got a galaxy to rebuild." And as we moved to join the Marines, I couldn't help but think about how thoroughly everything had changed. We'd called on the humans as our last resort, terrified of what they might do. Instead, they'd shown us exactly why they were feared, and why that fear had been misplaced all along. "Contact left," the young Nightblade trainee called out, her enhancers tracking the movement in the shadows. "3 targets, moving fast." I watched from my observation post as the training exercise unfolded. The recruits moved with growing confidence through the urban combat course, their movements showing the influence of both traditional Dren stealth techniques and newer tactics we'd learned from the humans. "Good spot," Staff Sergeant Williams called out from his position. The heavy Marine's massive armor somehow managed to blend perfectly with the shadows, despite its size. Another thing we'd learned from our human allies. "Now, how do you respond?" The trainees coordinated smoothly, using overlapping fields of fire while maintaining stealth discipline. Within moments, they'd neutralized the training drones without breaking cover once. "Better," Williams said, his armor reconfiguring as he stepped into view. "You're starting to think in 3 dimensions. But remember, the shadows aren't just for hiding, they're for striking." It had been 6 months since the final battle against the devourers, 6 months of rebuilding, of healing, of learning. The humans hadn't simply left after their victory, they'd stayed to help reconstruct what had been destroyed. And in the process, they'd changed everything. Hassup. Captain Kilroy's voice came through my comm. "Got a minute?" I made a few notes on the training session and turned command over to Williams. The human sergeant had volunteered to help train the next generation of Nightblades, combining our traditional methods with human tactical doctrine. The results were impressive. I found Kilroy near the new embassy complex, a massive structure that somehow managed to blend human and Dren architectural styles. Like everything the humans did, it was both beautiful and functional, designed to be both welcoming and defensible. "The latest diplomatic reports just came in," she said, her armor in its ceremonial configuration. "Thought you'd want to see them." I reviewed the data on my tactical display. The Andari Alliance was requesting closer ties with both the Dren and the United States and planets. The Trade Federation had reopened all commercial routes. Even the Mindweavers were reaching out, cautiously expressing interest in cultural exchange programs. "Amazing how quickly they changed their minds about isolation," I commented. Kilroy chuckled. "Amazing how quickly everyone changes their minds when they realize they were wrong about us." She paused, looking out over the city where human and Dren construction crews worked side by side. "They feared us because they didn't understand us. They saw our capacity for warfare and assumed that's all we were. And now, they're starting to understand what you figured out, that humanity's greatest strength isn't our technology or our weapons or even our Marines." She turned to face me. It's our ability to be whatever we need to be, warriors when necessary, builders when needed, teachers when asked. A Titan walked past in the distance, its massive form reconfigured for construction work. The same machines that had erased the devourers from existence were now helping to rebuild cities, their impossible weapons transformed into tools of creation. The Defense Council meets this afternoon, I said. They're voting on the formal alliance treaty. Kilroy nodded. Admiral Krupp is optimistic. Your people have proven to be exactly the kind of allies we've been looking for. Brave enough to fight alongside us, smart enough to learn from us, wise enough to teach us. A group of children ran past, Dren younglings playing with human kids from the embassy families. They were playing some hybrid game that combined elements from both cultures, their laughter echoing off the buildings. We feared you for so long, I admitted. The whole galaxy did. We thought your power made you dangerous. We are dangerous, Kilroy said simply. Just like you're dangerous. Just like any species capable of reaching the stars is dangerous. The question isn't whether you have the capacity for violence. It's what you choose to do with it. I thought about that as we walked through the city. Everywhere I looked, I saw signs of how things had changed. Human technology seamlessly integrated with Dren designs. Marine dropships patrolling alongside Nightblade teams. The shadows that had once hidden our fears, now sheltering our hopes. The younger ones don't fear you anymore, I said, watching another group of trainees run through their exercises under William's guidance. They admire you. Better than fear. Kilroy's armor shifted, adapting to a passing shadow. But admiration needs to be tempered with understanding. We're not gods or monsters, we're just people. People who've learned some hard lessons about war and peace, and who'd rather share those lessons than have everyone learn them the hard way. A alert chimed on my tactical display. The council meeting is starting. Shall we? Kilroy gestured toward the government complex. History waits for no one, not even heavy Marines. As we walked, I reflected on how completely everything had changed. We had called on the humans as our last resort, expecting either salvation or destruction. Instead, we'd found something far more valuable: understanding. The humans weren't to be feared or avoided. They were to be learned from, worked with, grown alongside. Their power wasn't a threat. It was a shield, offered freely to those who would stand with them as equals. You know, Kilroy said as we reached the council chambers, there's an old human saying, the most dangerous thing in the universe is a species with something to protect. I looked at her. Is that why you came? When we called? We came because you needed help. We stayed because we found neighbors worth protecting. She paused at the entrance. I know I may be a little on the nose, but I can't help myself when I think about it all, Robert. It's strange. I think you have hunted the killer, and we haven't found him yet. What is it then? It's our ability to care, to look at a species across the galaxy and say, these are our friends, and no one hurts our friends. She gestured at the rebuilt city around us. Everything else, the technology, the tactics, the terrible weapons, that's just how we show it. The council doors opened, ready to formalize what we'd already learned, that humanity's greatest power wasn't their capacity for warfare, but their capability for friendship, that their strength wasn't in their weapons, but in their willingness to use them in defense of others. We'd called on the humans as our last resort. They'd become our greatest allies, and the galaxy was better for it. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope you enjoyed it a lot. If you did, please be sure to give it a like. Feel free to comment and share this story too. It helps the channel grow. Let's make this channel huge together.